The nicest thing about coming of age is that I can do whatever I like. That quote comes from Celia Black. This is our second story share episode. I've collected 4 nonfiction pieces from 4 different authors with one common theme: coming of age. Expect to laugh, think, and likely reflect on your own memories of when you grew and changed. Welcome to Jackie Just Chatters. By sharing people's stories, I strive to generate laughter, inspiration, maybe help you escape from the stressful world. I am your hostess, Jackie Lentz, who's still figuring out her own story. This podcast comes out every other Thursday. I can be found wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube. I'd be most grateful if you left me some stars or a review, and subscribe if you never want to miss an episode. Thank you for listening and sharing. Warning: this episode has adult content. This is not a family-friendly episode. If you have issues of sexual content or sexual situations being discussed, you probably should pass on this. You've been told. All the social media and contact information provided by the authors today will be available in the episode notes if you would like to check them out. And if you like their story, why not let them know? Authors love that stuff. I like Celia Black's quote from the intro, but I would like to put my twist on it. The nicest thing about coming of age is that I can do it whenever I like. Because I believe coming of age can happen at any stage of life. My thought on what is coming of age is thus. It is a time when a person steps outside of themselves a little bit. They see the world in a different perspective. They grow as an individual. You do not have to be young to experience a coming of age. But that is the age group where we will begin our story journey today. We begin with a humorous insight into growing up in the 1970s from author Debra McQueen. In the mornings, Debra runs a program for students with learning difficulties at an international school. At night, she writes sometimes dark, sometimes comic poetry and prose. Her poems, short stories, and travel writing have appeared widely. Her poetry collection, Bad Girlfriend, came out on Singing Bone Press in 2015. She lives in Denver and regularly performs at the Moth StorySLAM. Put your bell bottoms on as we listen to the author tell the story in her own words.
Hi, I'm Debra McQueen, and this is Growth and Development. When I was in the 6th grade and Ken Roberts called me a hoe, I didn't know what to do. He sat behind me in Mrs. Cathcart's Algebra 1 class. I was even then a literal sort of person. In Growth and Development, my junior high's euphemism for sex education, I had learned that hoe was short for whore and that whore was slang for prostitute. I never even kissed a boy. I wore studious purple-framed glasses, had a mouthful of braces, and a developing affection for designer blue jeans. I could not bear to be called a hoe. I consulted my friend Kathleen in hopes she could come up with a suitable response, and I knew that she, like me, drew the line at actual cussing. It wasn't that we were prissy. On the contrary, Kathleen and I were in the habit of recording ourselves singing top 40 tunes in which we replaced keywords with our favorite expression. One of our cassettes featured me performing an earnest solo of You Fart Up My Life, with Kathleen making ever more explicit noises in accompaniment. My own parents were quite articulate cussers, so it wasn't lack of exposure that prevented me. I think it was simply that Kathleen and I were waiting for some kind of sacred oracle to indicate it was time for us to cuss. So far that hadn't happened, but for me to call Ken Roberts a jerk or a dork or even a fart head wouldn't suffice. Kathleen pondered my dilemma. You could call him a dildo. A dildo? What's a dildo? It's a vibrator, she informed me, like, duh. The year was 1977. Kathleen's family had been through Est. Plus, she had an older sister who was, to me, synonymous with everything sophisticated in the world. So it's likely Kathleen knew about the common uses of a vibrator. In fact, understood just exactly what it meant to call an 11-year-old boy a dildo. I did not. My parents had something called a vibrator. It was kept in a cardboard box that said vibrator in capital letters and had a picture of a woman with a bouffant hairdo pressing it into the middle back of her smiling husband. My mother sometimes applied it to my father while watching television. It had numerous attachments and made a lot of noise. To one with my limited experience, the word didn't have much power, but I was 11. I liked how it sounded, dildo, the way it sort of rolled off my tongue, dildo. And I could easily imagine the next time Ken Roberts spat ho at me, turning around and hurling that back at him. Shut up, you stupid dildo. Which is exactly what I did, right within earshot of Mrs. Cathcart. Her shock, I now imagine, must have been palpable because I found myself sitting in Principal Adams' office faster than you could say personal massager. My junior high principal was a reclusive alcoholic who rarely interacted with students. His office, a dark cave. You had the idea he would have done well as a small-town headmaster at the turn of the century, but as principal of 1,000 11 to 13-year-olds in the East San Jose of the 1970s, he was completely at a loss how to reign. He blinked at me through his red, rheumy eyes and cleared his throat. Do you know what that word means? Sure, Mr. Adams, I answered, eager to clear up the misunderstanding. It's a vibrator. My parents have one. My mom uses it on my dad all the time in the living room. I don't like to think that this incident had anything to do with Principal Adams being fired 6 months later after getting caught drinking on the job. But it had to have been difficult for him to hear that about my mother, especially considering she was his secretary at the time. That evening, my parents sat me down for a stern heart-to-heart. Where did you learn that word, young lady? I knew I was in serious trouble, but why? It's just a vibrator, I explained, rolling my eyes. How could anything Kathleen and I have dreamt up compare with Mom's frequent and copious use of words I only referred to by initials? What was the big effing deal? They did not punish me. My mom may have had a joyous sex book in the drawer of her nightstand, but it didn't make her comfortable talking about sex with her 11-year-old. I like to think they laughed about the whole misunderstanding once I was safely out of earshot. It was weird that I wasn't in trouble. But when I learned, so very many years later, that a dildo and a vibrator were two very different things, it all made sense. So Kathleen and I finished out the school year like many other 11 going on 12-year-old girls in the late 70s. We clipped pictures of Leif Garrett and Sean Cassidy out of Tiger Beat magazine. We grew expert at blowing a bubble inside a bubble, chewing bubblicious bubblegum. We fretted over our stunted physical development, and perhaps unique to us, we went on covering pop tunes, eventually recording a 60-minute cassette that included our hits, The Do Fart Fart, Fart Around Sue, and Farty and the Gents.
Our second author is Ruby Boddie, a Cornell University alumni. Her debut novella, Mama's Hair, was published in 2022 and received a 5-star review on Amazon. The cultural diversity within her family nurtured a curiosity about histories and folkways that grew deep roots in the New York melting pot. While traveling the wider Caribbean and the world, Ruby fed her appetite for storytelling, which you can explore on her blog, YouTube channel, and on Instagram. Let's dive into the world of another youthful coming-of-age tale, This one allows us to peek into the lives of recent immigrants and questions of identity. A herringbone coat and a chance. Her 11-year-old self was cocooned in a herringbone merino wool winter coat. The bold, geometric pattern of the outerwear was designed for someone who would shop at Bergdorf's, New York, and also someone 3 times the age of my sister Angie. Decades later, Angie and I laughed over not knowing Bergdorf's from Burger King. She swallowed a splutter as she asked me, "When last did you buy a coat from Bergdorf's?" I deadpanned on cue, "Never did, but I've bought a cheeseburger or 2. The coat's original owner was a well-heeled maven from Clearwater, Florida, who wintered in New York for the pleasure of the Broadway season. Not that it mattered one whit to us. It landed on Angie's back because of Celia, the woman's housemaid who was my mother's best friend. In one of their weekly telephone calls, my mother told Celia that both Angie and I would be needing warm clothes for our first winter in New York. When they come over, that would be the last payment to that immigration lawyer. Celia related to the sense of relief and accomplishment that her friend expressed. She had also gone through the bureaucracy of filing for a son to be approved for residency in the United States. We were the last of the Drake girls to arrive from the islands to join our mother, Velma. We needed winter wardrobes that could be secured on what was left in my mother's budget after paying the cost of our immigration to the United States. Flea market shopping was a survival experience into which we were duly inducted. To start, however, even the reduced cost of a second spring acquisition was a burden. My mother raised Celia to angel status when she snagged the coat from her boss's throwaways. She said that the coat would not have passed the in good condition stipulations of the upscale resale market that usually received clothing donations from her boss. Our wardrobe basics were Board of Inland Revenue approved charitable giving. Of course, Mammy was too busy with her 10-hour shifts as a cleaner to care about esoteric financial rules that permitted tax deductions for clothing that was part and parcel of the seasonal style rituals of mavens. All that mattered to my mother was that the coat was free and it fit without need of alteration. She poured her gratefulness into a West Indian fruitcake for Celia in return. Angie and I kept a loose tab on the times we heard our mother tell Celia, "Thanks for that coat, girl. It's really warm and fit her good." I sat on the stoop of the house that held our apartment, watching my sister play handball in her herringbone coat. Her thick, shoulder-length braids swayed in the wind as applauding her kick-ass energy on the concrete square that tripled as a handball court, basketball court, and neighborhood meeting spot in the swelter of summer. Of course, I was proud of her. More so, I was curious about how she had become so skilled at a ball game that was not played in the land of our birth. In our early days on new soil, home was still an English colony in the southern Caribbean where our ball games were cricket, netball, soccer, and rounders. With legs dangling from the low wall of the open stoop, I wondered how Angie could bear the sting of the ball. It became a missile as it ricocheted off the brick wall of the school wall, only for her to slap it back even harder with an open palm. Without consciously analyzing the full meaning of what I was witnessing, I sensed that in a mere 3 months after coming to America, Angie was destined to be a fully assimilated American. As American as the Italian and Jewish immigrants who had moved away from East New York to Flatbush after their housemaids started placing down payments on Brooklyn brownstones. Decades later, those buildings became coveted real estate by gentrifiers looking for safe ground after the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center. I could not predict any of that as I watched Angie on the handball court and the New York that Angie was in the process of navigating. What was left of the daylight gleamed off her lower legs. The lean muscles below the hem of her gifted day coat revealed her birthright. Her legs lustered like melted caramel as she ran towards and away from the wall that catapulted the hard rubber ball used in play. Angie's world was all about slapping that ball without missing. A winter sun had warmed my red brick front row seat as I watched Andy stake her claim for a new life in the dizzying geometry of a herringbone coat. Now grab your passport and we will travel with a teenage girl on a life-changing trip to Rome. Darlene Kurosky-Schneider is the writer of this story. Darlene was born and raised in Dearborn, Michigan, part of a large Polish family. She has published The Main Route, a collection of family stories and heritage going back 7 generations. Recently having lost her husband, she has focused her energy into writing a memoir, Marriage Survival with Love Letters, which is currently in the editing stage. Okay, off on an adventure we go. Awakening Sexual Desires. My parents had raised 4 daughters to respect ourselves. The Catholic Church taught us that our bodies were holy and only to be used for married couples to show their love for each other. We were expected not to engage in sexual activities until marriage. Neither parents nor our school initiated any discussion on the subject. The closest my father came to this subject was given to me the night before I left for Rome. "Watch out for those Roman hands," he said. I did not understand what he meant by that, but I thought it was a play on words about the city of Rome. I was a senior in high school and my sister was a sophomore when my parents decided to send us on a tour to the Holy City in Rome, Italy. As an art student, I could not wait to see such masterpieces by Michelangelo and Raphael. We were chaperoned by teachers from the Catholic high school where my sister attended. It was a group of about 50 students, and we would combine with another group of Catholic students from New Jersey to make it a total number of 100. The 2 groups were to meet in New York LaGuardia Airport to board our chartered flight to Rome. I could write about my experience of seeing the Pope, but I want to talk about the art. My first visual sexual experience of seeing Michelangelo's sculpture of David. The depiction of a perfect young man's body, with every detail in smooth marble. I had seen pictures of this sculpture, but to see it in person affected me immensely. As an art student, I should look at this with professional eyes. My first reaction awakened a sexual desire in my body that I was not expecting. The back of the David was appealing by the way the spine went down from the neck to the buttocks. The buttocks were so muscular and smooth. The front of the statue was a clearly defined abdominal muscle structure leading down to the genitals. I wanted to touch the curves and the penis, because I never knew what they looked like. I seemed to think the penis would be larger or longer. But then at that time, I did not know it was different with sexual stimulation. I was fascinated by this work of art. For the rest of the excursions, male nude sculptures were my favorite to admire. My sister kept coming by to grab me away as the rest of the group moved to another location. I was quiet on the drive back on the bus, remembering all that I felt and saw. Upon return from our tours each evening, we were served very nice meals starting with a pasta dish, then a main course and dessert. We were seated in a large banquet room with round tables seating about 8 persons to a table. There was one particular young server who seemed to be flirting with me. As he bent down to serve a bowl of pasta, he whispered in my ear, "Giuliano," he said. I responded, "Darlene." Over the next couple of days, there was a tease between us with smiles. On the last day of our stay, the hotel put on a dance for the American students in our dining room. The Americans were supposed to dance with each other, and the Italian staff were discouraged from flirting or carrying on with the girls. One of the boys told me that Giuliano wanted one dance with me, so the rest of the staff were keeping an eye out so we could dance together. Giuliano was very charming, and I was impressed with his Beatles-type haircut. He danced very close to me. Although I did not speak Italian, he whispered words in my ear that communicated his fondness very well. It seemed so innocent to have a dance with him. We left the next day for Sorrento, which is in the southwest part of Italy along the Mediterranean Sea. The staff lined up as we left, and we all waved goodbye. I took a picture from the bus of Giuliano standing next to his friend to remember him. Sorrento proved to be a romantic encounter for me. We spent the day touring Sorrento, took a boat to the island of Capri, the ruins of ancient Pompeii and Herculaneum. When the bus returned from our excursion, we found Giuliano and his friend waiting for the bus. I was very surprised, and my sister was sure that he came to see me. As we crossed the street, Giuliano walked up to me, took the packages out of my hand and placed them in my sister's arms, and took my hand to walk down the street. I could have resisted, but I didn't want to. It took me by surprise that this was happening. We walked for a while, holding hands. Until he took me to a narrow passage lined with tall apartment buildings on both sides. We were out of breath and laughing when Giuliano stroked my golden hair and touched my cheek. "Bella," he said. I was wearing a gold heart locket on my dress that my boyfriend gave me, with a note inside that read, "I love you." Giuliano opened the locket, and the love note blew away in the breeze. As I watched the little note fly away, it was a symbol of a warning to me. He had every intention to take me to privacy to kiss me. It was the most passionate kiss that I had ever experienced. The kind of kiss that aroused sexual feelings within parts of my body that I didn't even know existed. He held my head in his hands, and we stared and smiled. I wanted another kiss. Unfortunately, a woman was screaming in Italian from a window above us. I received a quick hug before he escorted me back to the busy street. When we returned to the street, I pulled him toward the hotel where our group was staying. My sister got permission for us to shop without chaperones, but we had to be back by a certain time whereby they would be going out for the evening. The four of us, Giuliano, his friend, myself, and my sister, set out to find something to do for the afternoon. To our surprise, we found a dance club. The club had live music and was filled with locals. It was the perfect reason to be in his arms. He stroked my back while we danced that sent electric waves of delight up and down my back. Our lips were never far apart during these slow dances. His tongue would part my lips to open my mouth. I had never been kissed like this before, and think to myself that it was at the right age of 18. We left the club because his friend wanted to leave. We walked the streets holding hands until dusk. The adults had left, so the boys were allowed to visit us in the lobby. The rest of the group was present to chaperone, but informed the boys that they would have to leave that evening. The boys ordered a beer, and I got cozy sitting on his lap. These are the only pictures that I have of Giuliano. He looked flush with redness on his face. As I felt his cheek and forehead, I realized he had a fever. I blamed myself for his illness, as I had arrived in Rome with strep throat. I did not want him going back to Rome that evening, so the boys in our group agreed to secretly give him and his friend a bunk for the night. In the morning, I was told Giuliano and his friend left. We never exchanged addresses, so I never saw him again. I have seen movies where couples reunite in later years. This is a romantic but impossible dream to be fulfilled for me. P.S. I married that boyfriend back home. He saw the picture of me sitting on Giuliano's lap looking up at me. He wanted no detail about the incident. Our last story is written by Josephine Schoenfeld. Josephine is a psychotherapist and published author in New York City. She is currently working on her first novel. Her piece shares the overwhelming joy that comes from loving your body. Goddess pose. My husband has the occasional urge to perform deviant sexual acts in our small but efficient Manhattan kitchen. Something about his Irish upbringing in the rural Midlands must have unconsciously attributed to this fetish. Wooden spoons are well within reach. This particular Wednesday morning, work from home perks, he decided to forego the flatware this time and requested a classic blowjob. As the consummate professional and generous partner that I am, I was happy to oblige in this round of kitchen seduction. Now, generally in these moments, as I'd like to keep it classic, at this point I would, as is the oral tradition, get on my knees. Instead, without any thought, only bodily instinct, just simply lowered down like a fleshy Zaptique elevator. A graceful but functional squat, my toes just slightly pointed outward like the daintiest of ballerinas. I wasn't thinking about how I got there at first, only to get to the current star of the show as quickly as possible. I started to engage and get into the flow, which gleefully gets me out of my head, focused on his, and purely into the moment. To add to the joy of this experience, I also began to pleasure myself with my left hand. I have, and always have been, a proud multitasker. As we both began to creep towards orgasm, the glisten from a nearby spatula catching my eye, I glanced down and connected my brain to the shape my body had taken. Knees bent, almost sitting feet turned out. Goddess pose. I realized I am sitting in goddess pose. I am in fucking goddess pose. I am giving a blowjob while fingering myself in goddess pose. I could not help but be impressed with myself and my body's ability to multitask her pleasure and power all at once. The body that was taught it was useless can do all this. The body that got mocked and abused because she was never the right size. The body that was told that love or sex would never come her way because it was weak and soft and wrong and disgusting. It was one of those wonderful moments I have found in adulthood where I am deliciously proud of myself that perhaps would be hard to explain to another person. Those moments of strength and power I didn't know I had until the muscles were already being flexed. My secret pride I had over my body. I can lift much heavier and do much more than people can realize. I don't mention this at all to my husband. He's in his post-orgasm glow anyway. He doesn't need to know. At least for now. I would rather keep that gleeful secret to myself. He kisses me on the cheek and returns to the stock market while I brush my goddess ass teeth and later adorn my luscious body in the finest of Dove body washes. Thank you, listeners, for joining this special Story Share episode. This podcast would be nothing without you. To the writers who so bravely sent their work in, I wish I had more time to put everyone in. Thank you for sharing your stories. They all touched me. Keep at it. I hope all of you will be back in 2 weeks for our next episode, which will be travel focused. Until then, I wish you well.